Hey everybody, welcome to my channel, Do Ministry Gaming, and today I'm going to run 10 gigajuiced, 100% Delirious, Tier 2 tower maps to see how profitable this mapping strategy can be. Now, I've done this once already with the Tier 14 Cemetery maps. If you haven't seen that video, please go and check that out. Uh, I will be running this in the same format. I'll be walking everyone through the setup and then tracking the profits and the drops from every map, and then giving a little bit of a summary on how profitable this mapping strategy can be. Now, the reason why we're running a tier 2 tower is because they are much easier than tier 14 cemeteries or tier 16 burial chambers. And this mapping strategy is gaining a lot of traction lately and is getting very popular because of that. You don't need a character that's nearly as geared to run a T2 map versus a T14 or T16 map. So it's much more accessible to a lot more people. And as well, you can run actually an item quantity character to increase the drops even further because the map tier 2 is so much easier to run. Now, in the case of this 10 map test, I am not running an item quantity character, but I believe most people who are doing the strategy are, just because you can. Now, I didn't want to create a whole new character just to run a 10 map test, so we'll do it anyway, and let's see. We'll see if the results stack up even without item quantity, and then at the end, we can conclude whether an item quantity character is actually necessary or not to actually make this strategy go around. So now I'm going to go through the setup of how I'm going to run these maps. The first, of course, is the map itself. And again, it's a tier 2 tower map, 100% Delirious, with the Delirium reward as currency. And hopefully stack as much currency as we can and see how profitable that can be. Otherwise, we're running very similar. The Fracture mod is Nemesis mod, again, to stack the currency. It drops, the quality is 35% on the map. It does not consume sextant uses. And we have copied 10 of these maps here. If you recall from the last video, to do that, you need fractured fossils. And I also run corroded fossils and dense fossils so that I don't roll mods that I can't do, like Reflect Ellie and annoying mods such as More Life. So I've already copied 10 of these. So we've got 20 Exiles worth of maps here to run. Now, the reason why Tower is the map of choice is because of the divination card that can drop here, which is the Nurse. The Nurse card sells for just a little over an Exalt the last time I checked. So really what you're trying to do in the strategy is drop as much currency as possible and as much div cards as possible, and hopefully you stack up the Exalts and the Nurse cards. So on the left are the 4 Scarabs that I'll be running with each map. The first is Gilded Ambush Scarab, which gives 5 additional strong boxes. The next is Gilded Divination Scarab for those nurse card drops. The third is Gilded Breach Scarabs for the additional monsters. And then the last is Gilded Elder Scarab. Now, for the Cemetery test, I ran Polished Legion Scarabs. And the reason why we don't run Legion here is because the map layout for Tower is not very good for Legions. The long hallways and the turns and the tight areas don't give a very good Legion spawn, unlike Cemetery. And so we've replaced that here with Gilded Elder Scarab. And you'll see on the Sextants when I go over them, I've also replaced the Legion encounter with something else as well. Now on the right are the 4 Watchstones that I am running. They all have Alteration Orbs, have a chance to drop as a full stack. I haven't actually tested those out myself yet, but I've heard that they are quite good, so we're going to run that in this test. Otherwise, the secondary mod that I have on these, I got the best that I could. So in this case, I got more rare monsters, and then a couple with increased quantity, and then the last one was just a whatever. That doesn't really matter. Now for the Sextants, I'm running almost the same as Cemetery again. The first is Nemesis Monsters drop 3 additional basic currencies. This, of course, combos with the Fracture mod I have on the map. Rare monsters have a Nemesis mod. In other words, rare monsters are Nemesis, and rare and Nemesis monsters drop currency. So all rare monsters on the map drop 3 additional basic currencies, which is what this strategy revolves around. The next is additional breaches, again for more monsters. The third is the Beyond for more monsters. And then the last is where it's different than the cemetery setup. In the cemetery, I ran additional Legion. And for the reasons I described before, we're not doing that now. So we've replaced that instead with Enraged Strongbox with 500% increased item quantity, which will combo with the Gilded Ambush Scarab quite well. As well, for the Prophecies, we're going to run Monstrous Treasure on every map, and hopefully it procs as much as possible. And so Monstrous Treasure, as you know, fills the map with strong boxes, which will be enraged and drop 500% item quantity. If you haven't done this before, it works out quite well, and hopefully it does in this case as well. Now, finally, on the Atlas Ascendancies, I'm running the 4 points for the Beyond on the left. We're running the 4 points for the Strong Boxes on the right. So a Strong Box have a 10% chance to be opened a second time. As well, all Strong Boxes are corrupted and at least rare. So this, in combination with Monstrous Treasure, in combination with Enraged Strong Boxes, in combination with Gilded Ambush Scarabs, makes for quite a strong strategy in this zone, actually. And then the last 2 points we're going to put in Cultural Advancement for Incursion monsters are at least magic. And the reason is because in the map device also, we're going to run Beyond as well as Alva, which gives the incursions, and they are a lot of monster kills as well as pretty good loot drops. All right, so just like the cemetery test, this is a quick summary of the costs that you need to pay to run one of these maps. So on the left are the costs of the fossils as well as the scarabs, and as you can see, per map you're actually running 256 chaos to run one of these maps, for a total of about 25 exiles to run 10 of these maps. So that is not cheap to run. So we're going to see at the end of this test whether we make our money back or not. On the right are sort of some other costs that are sort of more of the fixed costs. I paid a frac fee to get 10 copied for 50C because I didn't actually want to own this map. But otherwise, you'd have to buy the base map to copy, and that would probably run you somewhere around 10x or so. The Watchstones are cheaper in this case than the cemetery map ones. They cost me about 20 chaos per for a total of 80 chaos. The Sextants, though, I got a little unlucky. You have to roll the tier 3 Sextants. I think they're called Awakened. It took me 152 Sextants to get the 4 mods that I wanted, which works out to about 228C. And then, of course, I'm running the same character now. But again, the idea around these T2 maps is that you don't need that expensive of a character to run it. All right, everybody. So I've run the 10 maps now, and just like last time, I'm going to show you in-game very quickly what that loot looks like, nicely organized, before diving into a spreadsheet that really goes through the details of a cost-profit analysis. So what you'll notice here is I only got about 3 pages of loot in the 10 maps, unlike the cemetery maps where I got 8 or 9 pages. But if you recall, maybe like 5 or 6 pages of that was Scarabs, which is the big difference here, that I didn't get running the currency Delirium rewards instead of the Scarab rewards. The other quick highlights are that I got 4 nurse cards in the 10 runs and 9 exalted orbs in the 10 runs. Otherwise, you know, here's the standard currencies. The alterations dropped in abundance because of the Watchstones that I was running. But otherwise, you know, nothing else too special here. And then just a page of, you know, uniques that probably won't even sell that well, but I picked up anyway. All right, so here's a summary of my 10 tower runs, and this is laid out very similar to my cemetery runs, but for those who didn't watch that video, basically I've got 10 rows representing the 10 runs that I did with some averages along the bottom. In the green section on the left here represents the time breakdown for each of these maps. So on average, it took me about 11-12 minutes to clear each of these maps and about 7 minutes to loot, for a total time of 18 to 19 minutes per map. Now, if you recall from the cemetery runs, those took me about 25 minutes per run. So it does take a significantly less amount of time to run these maps. In the middle section in the yellow here is my cost profit analysis for each of these maps. If you recall, each of the maps cost me 256 chaos per run. At the middle column here represents the value of each of these runs calculated by the excellence overlay, which prices all the items against the PoE ninja. And then on the right here is the profits calculated by taking the difference of the two. Now, the first thing I think I'll talk about, which should be jumping out at you, is that I did not make my money back on every one of these maps. Unlike the cemetery runs where every map made its money back quite comfortably, actually. In this case, there were 3 maps, 5, 6, and 7, where I didn't make my money back. And if you just look one more column to the right here, on the Giga drops, you'll see an immediate correlation. In these 3 maps, I did not drop either the Exalted Orb or the Nurse card. And so that was one thing I'll say that I felt as I did these 10 maps, is that the value I get back, or the profits that I make, is heavily correlated to how many Exalted orbs and Nurse cards that I'm getting. And when you don't get any, as I did not in these 3 maps, it really sucks. And then one very quick note is I did track when I procced Monstrous Treasure, and as you can see in this last column here, I only procced it twice out of the 10 runs. For anyone who has used Monstrous Treasure before, it can be quite unpredictable in terms of when you actually get it to proc. So in this case, I only had 2 runs, but in the 2, there wasn't a very obvious correlation as to whether it was better or not. And so I will just leave it at that. All right, so in this table down here is the summary of the 10 maps. Very quickly, I invested 2560 chaos, which is about 25 and a half exalts into these 10 maps. I had a total value of 32 exalts. I made a profit of about 6.5 exalts, and it took me about a little over 3 hours to run. If you recall, the cemetery was maybe like even 4.5, maybe even 5, close to 5 hours to run all those maps. So much quicker. But if you take that into a per hour basis, I'm making about 206 chaos per hour versus the cemetery was making about 900 chaos per hour. All right, so here is where I think I need to make a couple or maybe a few very important and distinctive points. The first is, while not as the numbers aren't showing as good as cemetery, there are pros to this mapping method. The first is you don't need anywhere close to the type of character to run these maps that you need for a cemetery map. If you're talking about needing 200 exalts to run the cemetery maps versus 30 exalts to run this, there's 170 exalt difference there. And the difference between cemetery map and this, 7 exalts per hour, that still takes a lot of hours to make up for that 170 exalts. So there's that. The second is, and this one's very important, is there are lots of ways to, I think, improve this number. Like I mentioned before, lots of streamers are doing this now. They are all, the ones that are showing good profits, all running an item quantity setup, which I'm not doing here. And that, I think, will significantly improve this number. So I think one thing I'll maybe suggest is that if you do plan on running this mapping strategy, do run it with an item quantity character, at 206 chaos per hour. Yeah, it's still good, don't get me wrong, but there's a little bit of unpredictability too, right? You're not making back your money every map. It's still a heavy investment for the amount of return. And so, I would recommend strongly, if you're going to do this mapping strategy, to run the item quantity characters like all the other successful streamers doing this at this moment. The other thing is there's other ways to improve the value of this, or even just increase the reliability of your returns. And the one I can think of is running the Vol Wins prophecy, maybe instead of Monstrous Treasure. For those who aren't familiar with Vol Wins, it's basically a prophecy that will occasionally give you a buff that lets monsters drop corrupted items, which means you're going to get a lot of corrupted 6-links, which means you're going to get a lot of divine orbs. And that's one way I've seen that can quite significantly improve the reliability of these maps, because you're dropping a ton of divine orbs essentially. Now, one other thing you can do too is these maps can also come enchanted with one more enchant, which includes a blight encounter, which I would recommend really on any type of 100% delirious map that you're going to run in this style. And that's going to get you some more monsters kill, which is more drops. Also, it will increase your delirium rewards. All right, so I've got here a little bit of a bonus insight clip that I didn't actually originally intend to put into this video, but happened by chance, and that is that I ran 10 Tier 14 tower maps with the exact same setup, except that it's Tier 14 versus Tier 2, and only one other difference, which is that I'm using the Scarab Delirium Award again instead of the Currency Delirium Award, because at Tier 14, the Gilded Scarabs can drop again. And so the results are on the blue on the right here, and as you can see, on an average per map profit, I was actually making 409 chaos per map versus the 64 chaos per map. And the other important thing to note is that every map made a profit, even after paying for the map, a very healthy profit. And I was comfortably in the green. And even in the two maps, map 2 and map 5, where I didn't drop an Exalted Orb or a Nurse card, I was still making a profit of 260 to 280 chaos on each of these maps. And that goes to show, I think, like I mentioned before, the Scarab Delirium rewards certainly create sort of a floor value for these maps. A much more reliable and consistent way of breaking even on the maps versus, if you recall back here, when I was running the tier 2 currency rewards, there were 3 maps where I just lost money because I didn't drop any exalted orbs or nurse cards. So, the scarabs definitely have a lot of value, and just by this comparison here, you can say that scarabs actually have around 250 chaos worth of value, probably around there, just by itself. And then everything else that drops on top of that would be kind of gravy. Any exalts and nurse cards that you get would be sort of the bonus and the on top profits that you're getting. All right, everybody, there you have it. The results of running 10 gigajuiced 100% delirious tier 2 tower maps. Now, not to beat a dead horse, but if you want to embark on this mapping strategy, I would personally recommend that you run it alongside an item quantity type character. There are a ton of build guides out there for these types of characters. The popular option these days seems to be Lightning Arrow, so make sure you check those out if that's where you want to go. But if not, 200 chaos per hour mapping strategy on its own certainly is nothing to shrug off, and is really a great way to dive into the world of 100% delirious mapping if that's something you wanted to dabble in. The barrier of entry with these tier 2 maps is much, much lower and much easier to access than the tier 14, tier 16 cemetery and burial chamber type maps. So this is a great way to start if that's the way you want it to go. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please like and subscribe. I also stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Times are in the description below. If you have any questions about this particular mapping strategy or any of the other YouTube content I put out, feel free to stop by my stream and ask, or leave a comment below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.